And that's what climate change is about. It is literally, not figuratively, a clear and present danger.
We are in the beginning of a mass extinction.
The ability of CO2 to do the heavy work of creating a climate catastrophe is almost nil at this point.
The price of oil has been artificially elevated to the point of insanity.
That's not how you power a modern industrial system.
The ultimate goal of this renewable energy, plan is to reach the exact same point that we're at now.
You know who's tried that? Germany. 7 straight days of no wind for Germany. Their factories are shutting down.
They really do act like weather didn't happen prior to 1910.
Today is Friday.
It is Friday. Thank you, Greta, for your usual introduction. Today, we're going to talk about some of the follies of green energy. In the news lately has been fires, and we're not talking wildfires in California or Canada or in the Rockies or something like that. We're talking about battery fires. The green left wants to save the planet by getting everyone to drive an electric car. Never mind the fact that the grid can't support that. But there's problems with these things. So today we're going to talk about that. With us, we have our usual panel, Linnea Lueken and Sterling Burnett, who will provide us some insightful and interesting comments related to these topics. So in addition to the battery fire topic, we're also going to talk about ESG, which is basically a governance plan pushed onto business to basically provide a score for the environment for everything that you're doing related to business. Turns out, though, business doesn't seem to like that so much. We'll talk about that. So first, let's get to our panel and our first topic. Hi, guys. Welcome.
Hello.
Anthony, Linnea, good to see you.
Yeah. So first of all, I want to give full disclosure that I have owned electric cars in the past, and none of them have caught fire. But they were using lead acid batteries and not lithium batteries. So there's that. So I do have hands-on engineering work experience with electric cars as well as batteries. But I don't own one anymore because, well, it just wasn't practical. Simple as that. So guys, have either of you owned an electric car or driven one?
I had an electric Barbie Jeep when I was 4.
I have not owned an electric car. I have experience with a hybrid. I've driven one at a show. I drove a natural gas car as well at the same show. And my mother, however, has a hybrid. So it's part electric, part gasoline, and it has never blown up either. But when her battery did go out, it basically, she now runs only on gasoline. And if her gasoline engine goes out, we'll have to push it into the lake because the battery's too expensive to replace. The battery pack is more expensive than the car's worth.
Oh my goodness. Well, yeah, that's the main problem. The battery packs with all these vehicles, either they don't live up to their promises in terms of range or charging or whatever, or they catch fire, or they die and are no longer useful, and they're so expensive to replace that it's not practical. So one of the things that we've been seeing a lot of in the news is the fact that Tesla, the most successful electric car company on the planet, has had a problem with battery fires. And one of them, this one here, a Tesla car spontaneously catches fire on a California freeway, requiring 6,000 gallons of water to put it out. And the problem is that, well, lithium is in these batteries, and lithium and water don't mix. I don't know if you guys have ever had a chemistry experiment in high school where you put sodium in water and watch it explode. Lithium does the same thing. And these lithium batteries can explode when they have ingress from water or just simply from water in the air if they develop a leak, or during an impact. The battery pack gets damaged and air comes in. Maybe there's another fire, or something else, and the firefighters come along and spray some water on it because, maybe something else is going on with the other vehicle, that caught fire, maybe in an impact. And then you get the water on the Tesla and poof, up it goes, because lithium likes to take off in the middle of water. It oxidizes the water, makes a great fire. So, what do you guys think about these things? I mean, is it really worth owning an electric car to save the planet if you've got these kinds of risks going on?
Well, everyone's got to make that, make that calculation on their own. But there are, third-party effects. There are impacts outside of, if your house burns down, it's one thing. If the embers fly from your house to your neighbors, that's another thing entirely. I know when I was driving back from Austin 2 or 3 years ago, I-35 runs north to south, and it's never a good drive. There's a lot of traffic, and they're always doing construction, and especially going through Waco. And I was coming back from I think Corpus Christi, and there had been an electric car that had gotten caught in the traffic, in the basically the standstill traffic on the south side, and it caught fire while it was just sort of sitting there. And they literally had to clear everybody else, back them up, and move them forward all around this car, close down the whole highway for hours while they put this car out. Now, some people might say there wasn't much difference as far as closing the whole highway down, because it seems like a standstill most of the time. But believe me, that lone car sitting in the middle of a 4-lane highway told a pretty powerful story, as incinerated as it was. And I've written about this a lot. This isn't a rare thing. It's not cars, it's scooters. It's just last week a scooter caught fire in New York and burned down an apartment building.
we have a story on that we'll show in a bit. Yeah.
This is a hazard to people, and until they get the engineering of it figured out, I don't think these bombs should be on the road.
Yeah. Interesting thing.
I don't know what the rate is between something like an all-electric car catching fire spontaneously from its battery having a problem compared to like any car that has a battery in it catching fire. But the idea that, the government is actively encouraging people to keep more and more of these in their garage and park them up and down the streets at their charging stations that they put on major streets. Kind of a questionable policy. I'm not sure. I'm not anti-electric car, but I think that probably the technology isn't being developed as rigorously as it otherwise would be if it wasn't part of the climate agenda. I think that if these cars didn't have this, we're saving the earth by driving these things, virtue signal, then there might be a little bit more caution and skepticism with widely adopting them.
Yeah, that's a good point, Linnea. Very good point. And these things, I want to point out that there was a time in the past when lithium batteries in laptops and cell phones were a big risk. There was a period of time when they were banned bringing them onto airlines because they would spontaneously catch fire. There were a couple of videos of a laptop catching fire inside an aircraft because the battery went kaboom. But it seems that the computer industry has solved their lithium battery problem, and we don't see these restrictions anymore, and we don't see these problems anymore. Why do you guys think that lithium batteries in cars are still having this problem?
Well, I want to say two things, Anthony. Not so fast, because just last week, a battery in a stowed, above cabin stowed, either, I forget whether it was a cell phone or a personal device, caught fire in air, caught smoke, and they had to land the plane. So it's not completely, and it wasn't charging, so it's not completely solved. They do say don't charge it while you're on the plane if you've got these devices. And as far as your luggage, they ask you, do you have one of those those vaping devices? Why? It's not like you're going to smoke it if it's in the hold. No, it's because of the battery. So even the small batteries, I think the problem with part of the problem with the car batteries and the battery packs is how they are compartmentalized. Small batteries don't have these multiple compartments. But also, I think battery after battery packed up against each other as opposed to a single battery, and they're all generating heat. I think, I'm not an engineer, but I'm guessing it just reaches a maximum point where it explodes. And that's what they haven't figured out, both the compartmentalization and how to store one battery after another, because it happens at battery factories. It happens at battery backup power plants. When it happened in Australia, they literally had to close the power plant, and the the fire department had to let it burn for 3 hours before they even tried to go in. And when they did, then noxious gas came out that they weren't prepared for.
Yeah, that lithium oxidation product is really nasty. If you breathe that in, it'll damage your lungs badly.
No.
So, Linnea, what's your take on it?
Well, I don't have a whole lot to add that hasn't already been said, but yeah, I think that a lot of the problem with the electric car batteries in particular is that the last photograph I saw of one, it's pretty much the entire undercarriage, right? I mean, it's huge. It's not just like a normal car battery. And it's very close to the ground because there's nowhere else to put it.
And
And
center of
so,
gravity, they need to have
yeah.
it low.
And so that's the part of the car that's most exposed to the most, erosion from, if you live in a state that uses road salt, that can be a huge problem. I had a clamp come apart into dust particles from road salt, eroding it, and rust. If you live in a state that gets a lot of snow or rain or anything like that, then this battery will be more likely to be exposed to those corrosive elements. And I think that's part of the problem. I'm not sure how you would fix that besides just encasing it in more stuff. But these kinds of engineering problems are tricky because the more stuff you put on the battery, the more problems you might have with overheating, and also the more problems you have with the weight. You can't, these electric cars they already weigh, from what I understand, significantly more than a normal car.
Yeah.
And
comparable cars.
Yeah, so now you've got extra casing on them to try to avoid the battery compartment from getting into contact with road salt or whatever it happens to be. It's a tricky problem. I wouldn't say that they'll never figure it out, but right now I don't think there's very much incentive to figure it out because these cars are basically mandated at this point in places like California. So I'm not sure how they'll get the desire to fix it.
Yeah, they're pushing them out the door as fast as they can produce them because government's basically encouraging that, both with subsidies and mandates. And when the government tells you to, says you sell something, it sort of indemnifies you to some extent against some of the damage that could be done. They can say, look, we'd like to have taken more time, but the government said, get this out there. It's interesting what you said, Linnea, and I honestly had never considered this, but there's two things going on there. It seems like, look, I drive down roads all the time that have what I would call road hazards, potholes, large chunks of concrete that have broken off from a curb due to an accident, things like that. And it's bad enough when I ride over those things in my SUV. I can't imagine what it does to the undercarriage of a low-lying electric vehicle. It would scratch the casing that contains the batteries. And it's not just salt and chemicals, it's water. That's what Anthony was pointing out. Is like, look, just the moisture itself. So let's say you run over a road hazard, you've now opened a crack in your casing and the water pours in. You've created you've made it more likely for a fire. In addition, maybe it's not as true in other states, but in Texas, the highway surface gets pretty dadgum hot during the
dadgum. I love that.
during the middle of summer, right? And if you're sitting in traffic, stop and go traffic on a highway that's probably 10 degrees hotter, maybe 20 degrees hotter than the surrounding area temperature wise, and your little battery pack is sitting down there mere inches above that radiating heat, I imagine that's sort of not a good thing.
Yeah,
Maybe
they should measure temperature for climate studies right below Tesla cars. That'd be a great place. Really, I mean, seriously. Here we got this video or this page up here from Vox about why Teslas keep catching fire, and they do point out that the electric cars catch fire less than gasoline cars. I mean, gasoline car fires have been around since gasoline cars have been around, but the thing about them is you can put them out quickly. Water puts out petroleum fires. The problem we've got with the Teslas and all the other electric cars is once they catch fire, you can't do much about it. It's just going to have to burn itself out, and it produces nasty, noxious fumes as that lithium combusts, which can be a breathing hazard on its own. And some people point out, well, what's really the carbon footprint of a Tesla car when it catches fire? I mean, does it negate all of the supposed savings for the planet that you're supposed to get out of it? It may very well be.
When your scooter catches fire and burns down a whole complex, I suspect the carbon footprint of that may skew the issue. But now I haven't read this article, Anthony, so maybe you can answer this question that I have. I'm wondering if that's true, in the sense of this: as a percentage of the cars on the road, do electric cars catch fire more frequently than gasoline powered cars? And it's a different kind of thing. My suspicion is that all those gasoline powered cars that catch fire are in accidents.
Exactly. They don't see spontaneous combustion.
I've never heard of a car sitting in a garage or a motorcycle just all of a sudden, hey, I'm going to catch fire now. It's a different causation. And I would wager that even as a percentage, when you talk about how many hundreds of millions of gasoline powered vehicles on the road, how many catch fire each year, in absolute numbers, it may be more than. I don't want to just stick with Tesla.
There's more gasoline cars, so naturally there's going to be more.
So as a percentage, it's going to be smaller. But let's face it, Chevy recognized this problem with the Volt. It was so bad they had to recall them all. 3 years of Volts had to go back to the factory,
right?
Because so many of them were spontaneously combusting.
Sterling, to that point, what the Vox article said was that this figure that they have is based on Tesla's self-reporting. There is no tracking mechanism for, there's no federal tracking mechanism for car fires that divvies them up by what kind of car they are.
Yeah.
That'd be a great project for the Heartland Institute to get into. We could put our own battery fire tracking system together. We could register splode.com.
Yeah. So Tesla alone's reported numbers are lower than the rate of overall highway fires. I'm surprised that I'm not surprised because Vox are hacks. That they would say, that they wouldn't have any kind of questioning of that reporting mechanism. But like I said, Vox are partisan hacks. So I'm not overly surprised that they're not skeptical of that claim.
Well, like I said, I wouldn't be surprised if in absolute numbers, more gasoline powered vehicles do catch fire. Just it wouldn't be spontaneous. There's just so many more, and they get into so many more accidents. But as a percentage of the vehicles on the road, so how many Teslas catch fire versus how many all other gas-powered vehicles as a percentage? My suspicion is Tesla's numbers are higher, but that's not the number they focused on. They focused on absolute numbers.
It's not in their best interest to report fires because that, of course, will quench the sales. I mean, people are worried about their vehicle spontaneously combusting. I wonder if there's a clause in the Tesla contract when you buy one of these things. And I know this the legal contract to buy a Tesla is like a mile long, but I wonder if they have a clause in there about spontaneous combustion where you have to basically say, well, your insurance has to cover it, not the company. I wonder if that exists.
I would wager
they might do that.
I would wager they have pretty good data on that in the sense that since warranty covers a lot of things for the first few years, I would wager Tesla knows every time one catches on fire because it's sent back to them for fixing. I could be wrong about that, but I bet that's the case.
One thing that also needs to be considered is a lot of people are extremely negligent with how they treat their car. Most people are not car people. They don't take their car in for scheduled maintenance or checkups. They basically run the tires until they start falling apart, and then they're like, "Oh, I better get my tires checked because there's like scraps of them on the road behind me." And you see this all the time, and I'm sure that there are specific manufacturers suggested maintenance and checkups for the battery pack, and I guarantee that it's not cheap and that a lot of people are going to forego doing that. Or they just won't even crack open their owner's manual once and just I'm one of those people that like checks off, like that has that in my glove compartment, and I take it in. And this is my dad's fault. He's the one who makes me do this, or who, taught me to do this. But I take, if my little Volkswagen says, you need this particular type of scheduled checkup at 75,000 miles or whatever, I dang well take it in at 75,000 miles and get it checked up. So I think that, and while it's not necessarily the manufacturer's fault, if you're not taking that car in and no one's looking at the undercarriage every once in a while, and you haven't noticed that there's all these like deep gouges and stuff in your battery pack, then that's just a disaster waiting to happen.
Well, and to be fair, it's not as if every mechanic can work on these things. My mom's hybrid, Toyota hybrid. Toyota's a popular car. She's got a hybrid Prius. But when she took it to Firestone, they said, "We can't do this." Firestone. That's not a shade tree mechanic you've never heard of. They said, "No, you got to take this back to the dealer. They've got to deal with this."
Yeah.
How many Tesla dealers do we have in Dallas? Oops. And they're not mechanic shops. It's not, they're in malls, fancy malls with guys in suits. Where do you take your Tesla to get it serviced? So a lot of things going on there. I suspect. We were talking earlier about government pushing these things, right? And it's bad enough when your car catches fire. It's doubly bad if it catches something else on fire.
Right.
It's triply bad if it kills somebody, right?
True.
And so you have to ask yourself, how many people are we putting at risk? I remember earlier this summer in Connecticut, the governor of the state came out and said, "We're going to go to all electric buses by date certain. And we're incentivizing this." And the state capital had already had, I think it was 7 or 9 electric buses they were bragging about. And the day after he gave that speech and said, "We're going to mandate this," one of the electric buses caught fire in the garage under the awning, spontaneously bursting to combustion, and they had to pull the entire fleet off. He's bragging, "We're going to mandate this," and it's catching fire a day later. And you wonder, so if it was on the street when it did that at a stop, could people get off? Would there be panic? How many people have to be injured or killed before we start questioning whether it's really, really a good idea to be forcing, like I said, if people want to put themselves at risk, but to be forcing everyone to get in these things?
Public transit has been a losing proposition for decades throughout the country, and yet they keep pushing public transportation as the solution to climate change, but nobody wants to use it. I mean, literally, the percentage of people that use public transportation is just a mere fraction of the people that are traveling on any given day. And now with the advent of, we're going to save the planet by having electric buses, who wants to get on one of these things, knowing that, you may, on a hot day, pull up to a stoplight and the thing spontaneously combust? I certainly wouldn't want to get on one of these things.
Yeah. Well, it's so bad. It's so bad for public transit right now, Anthony, that look, it's always been a money loser. The general taxpayer, our gas taxes help pay for this, subsidize every rider. Every rider is subsidized. Now, public transit is doing so badly that many cities, because they want more people on public transit, are offering free bus service to people. You don't have to pay anything, not even your dime, your quarter, your dollar when you get on the bus. No, it's free just to attract people, which means, of course, it ain't free. Taxpayers are picking up the entire cost of these trips.
Yeah. And so not only is, public transit a losing proposition in terms of ridership, now it's just basically becoming a money hole, much like, the bullet train in California, where it started out at 33 billion, right? 33 billion was the cost, and voters voted it in. Now it's up to 125 billion, and they still haven't got the thing completed. And all it's going to do is go from one part of the north end of the Sacramento Valley up near Merced down to Bakersfield. What use is that? You can drive that section of Interstate 5 and just as easily as you can get on the bullet train, but you can't. What are you going to do? Rent a vehicle once you get to Bakersfield? What's the point of it? It's completely useless. Here's the thing, though. These electric buses sometimes don't even make it here to the United States. Here's a video of buses in China. These are ready to roll. Look at this. Boom. Just sitting there. Yeah, I want to get on that and ride downtown, don't you?
Oh, and look, it caused that chain reaction, right? One bus catches, then the next.
Right.
Same thing happened in France. In Paris, they pulled their entire electric bus fleet off the road after bragging about it. Oh, we're reducing carbon. Well, until that happens, I don't see a lot of carbon reduction in that right there.
Yeah, there's no carbon reduction going on there.
What's that black stuff? Oh, that's real carbon, not carbon dioxide. That's carbon.
Hey, look, there's a dumpster fire to the. Oh, you missed it.
Yeah.
Go back there, Andy. Look, there's a dumpster fire.
Yeah, they caught the dumpsters on fire. Yeah, that's fantastic.
Oh man. So it's not just buses that are spontaneously combusting in China. There's these the new craze, and you can even buy these things now in Costco. And I was actually considering about buying one of these, is e-bikes. A lot of the folks that are nature lovers and save the planet type folks, they want to bicycle everywhere, right? So they go out and they buy e-bikes, and they're great, save the planet with e-bikes, right? Problem is, they have the same problem as the Teslas. Yeah. They can simultaneously spontaneously catch fire and just poof, go up in flames. We've had in the last couple of weeks a couple of news stories where an e-bike that was set up to charge overnight caught fire all by itself and burned down an apartment complex in New York, where people are buying these e-bikes in droves. The problem is starting to soar. And it's the same basic problem. Lithium batteries are not stable. If they get disturbed, overheated, damaged, whatever, they can catch fire. Even just charging on their own, if there's a defect inside the battery, they can catch fire.
It's interesting that it's the newer generation ones that are having these problems. It's got to be. I didn't look into what old e-bike batteries were. Maybe they were not a lithium ion battery, but a bike with a little electric motor attached to it that you charge with pedaling or whatever, those have been around for longer than I've been alive. I mean, they've been around forever. So, and I there wasn't always this, you sit it down for 10 minutes and all of a sudden you come back to a smoldering pile of ash. There wasn't a problem with the old bikes that way. So I wonder what the difference is with these new generation ones. It must be the lithium ion. I don't know what else has really changed.
Now, I should say, you hope you come back to, you hope that you're not riding on top a ticking time bomb that goes off while you're sitting on it, right? And another problem is the charging, right? So you buy a new, I don't want to pick on Tesla. So you buy a new Chevy Volt, I don't know, or one of the other electric vehicles on the road. and you park it in your car, which in my case is the garage is underneath my master bedroom, and you're charging it. Now you can overcharge them. They start to heat up if you leave it on the charger too long. So to make sure you don't do that, are you going to start setting your alarm every night to go off at say 2 a.m? So you go take the car off the charger and it doesn't overcharge. So you actually still wake up in the morning as opposed to wake up when the flames are rising above you. I see that as a little problem.
Yeah. Well, you're going to have to start incorporating a lot of computer chips and stuff into it, because like your cell phone automatically will stop itself from charging if you leave it plugged in and it starts charging over 100%. That, it's got software that'll make it stop pulling power. But I don't know if these bikes have it. It doesn't really seem like they do if they're overheating. And that's why they say that you're not supposed to leave even something like an electric drill charging overnight.
Yeah,
because those battery
a
packs
problem
are known
with
to catch fire.
The most popular electric drill out there, the DeWalt electric drill set, had the problem with the charger. If you put those battery packs on the charger and leave them for an extended period of time, especially when it's hot, like at a job site or working inside a building that's not air conditioning, these things can catch fire. And this is known. And it's the same basic problem. Lithium batteries are not stable. And so it's just a problem all around. So what are you going to do? New battery technology might be helpful. But that seems to be off and far in the distance, much like we're always promised, nuclear fusion. It's always a few years away. And new battery technology seems to be always a few years away.
But you mentioned something earlier, Anthony. You talked about, once again, it was another thing I hadn't even considered. All these 500,000 charging stations that Biden wants to put all across the country, right? So you're going to have to put them along the highway where people pull off to charge. My suspicion is they'll probably co-opt or pay a lot of gas stations to put them there. And first off, I'm not sure I want an electric charging station for vehicles that explode near large fuel depots. But if they start catching on fire, it blocks up the highway, even if they're not on the highway, right? The emergency vehicles will have to come off the off ramp. They'll want to divert traffic because of the fumes. And of course, anyone that's sitting in line waiting for that charger, that 20 to 80% charge that you can get at a really, really fast charger in 15 or 30 minutes. That's just a nightmare that I hadn't even considered. And of course, then, and I've been wondering this, and it doesn't have to do with the safety, but there is a problem with people, with copper thieves, right? Stealing copper from air conditioners all over the country at public schools. My suspicion is there's a lot of copper in these charging stations. And if these charging stations are going to be in like isolated locations along the highway, so you can pull off and charge miles from the nearest whatever else, a copper thief might see that as a nice, an easy get.
I wanted to point out, someone in our comments said that part of the reason for a lot of the e-bike fires is that people are making their own and modifying them to overcome the speed limit on them, the speed limiters. That sounds about right. I could believe that because the first thing you do when you get an electric golf cart or something is you wonder if you can take the limiter away that keeps you from going too fast.
That's funny. Well, they've got a real problem.
And it's an interesting point about that. You don't see in the gasoline power industry, there's a whole culture about hot rodding, making a stock vehicle into something hot and fast, right? Mm-hmm. But you don't see that happening in the electric car. No one hot rods an electric car. It's just too much because the technology is difficult to work with. And what can you do?
Well, they're ugly too. It doesn't help that they're ugly. Can you imagine pulling up next to a Dodge Challenger or a Chevy Camaro or something on a flat track in a Chevy Volt? It's just,
I don't know. That one Fisker was pretty good looking.
The Fisker was the only electric vehicle I ever considered. I ever thought, I'd like to have that. That's the one I liked. And of course, you know how well that did. So, but gosh, I don't see many people laying down bets or going, "Ooh, I got to have that Volt when it's on the line." Like to have a car like that. Just
Yeah, it was an awesome looking vehicle. In fact, there was a TV series called Two and a Half Men that ran in the 2000s to 2014 era, I believe it was. And in the second iteration of it, after Charlie Sheen self-combusted and got himself thrown off the show, they had the lead, Ashton Kutcher, driving a Fisker. And it was a cool car. And you're right, Sterling. I wouldn't mind having one of those. And that thing could probably do 0 to 60 in 3.5 seconds or whatever. Problem is that like many of these electric car companies, Fisker was highly subsidized by the government. In fact, they took out a $529 million loan from the Federal Department of Energy. And they were going to create thousands of union jobs from that money, which made it attractive, to the folks that are in the politics. And they were going to create this signature luxury car. Well, the company missed every deadline they promised. They missed paying back the loan. The production of the vehicle was suspended in 2012. And eventually the federal loan that was made to this was suspended, and taxpayers took a $139 million loss. The facility in Delaware where they were building these things was sold to the Chinese, go figure, auto parts company. And so that whole thing got gutted. And then that building was eventually torn down. So Fisker is like the Solyndra of electric vehicles, a total and complete failure of the promise to deliver and the promise to perform, and a big taxpayer boondoggle. And that's been the big problem with a lot of these.
The Fisker had also sort of technical problems, not just that it was slow to deliver and things like that, but just like the DeLorean way back in the 80s, right? Everyone, Linnea may not know the DeLorean unless she watched Back to the Future. But it was a good looking car. It was underpowered, but it also sort of leaked around its door. It had problems with that. Well, Fisker had problems like that, is that it looked good. Its performance was pretty good, but it also just had sort of technical difficulties. And then they had all the other things. So you're right. I suspect it would not have gotten, if one of the major companies had decided they were going to build the Fisker from ground up, it wouldn't have made it onto the lot until they got most of those kinks worked out. And of course, then they recall, right? If there's a real problem, they recall, and they get it fixed. There was no Fisker left to recall anything.
Yeah, the hot car that Ashton Kutcher drove in Two and a Half Men was the Fisker Karma, I believe, which perfect name for an electric vehicle, right? The Karma is strong with this one.
Yeah, well, it was also featured, and there was a show called Leverage that the lead actor drove a Karma as well. And like I said, great looking car. I've actually looked at buying one second hand. Despite the problems, they're still way overpriced, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so now, what do you do if you own one of these things? You spend $100,000, $200,000 on one of these cars. The company's out of business. How do you get it serviced? How do you keep it running? You don't. So not only was the initial taxpayer-driven investment a total tank, now all of the owners are in the tank too, because they can't do anything to keep these cars running because the company's out of business. The bottom line is a complete failure.
Well, and the mandates and stuff don't seem to be working very well. But all of this that we've said about, the issues with the batteries and everything isn't to say that some of this can't be, engineered out of it. One of our commenters says that he's a mechanic, and he says that EVs are a POS. I have heard from many people who work on cars that they just despise the electric vehicles. They suck to work on. They don't like it at all. But I think Formula One cars are hybrids, aren't they? But that's because electric cars can get up and go a little bit faster. There's a lot of, racing uses for a hybrid electric or anything like that. It's not that the technology is utterly worthless. It's just mostly not ready for prime time for your everyday driver, depending on what your situation is. There was an article a couple of weeks ago, or maybe just 2 weeks ago, about how they did some tests at the furthest north test track for electric vehicles, way up there in Scandinavia. And a large chunk of the cars, when they were left overnight, wouldn't start in the morning, which is common, which happens to all cars, anything with a battery in it. If you leave it in the cold, everyone who lives in a cold environment has experienced their car being a little bit grumpy to start or not starting at all if their battery lost charge in the cold. But in those cases, you just get a jump. I don't know if you can just jump a car that's nothing but battery.
And jump from what? I ain't plugging my car into it to try,
right.
And
it's far distances too. The cold decreases your towing capacity. So if you're one of these people who lives up in the furthest reaches of Canada or Russia or Norway or something, then there is a serious health risk to yourself getting stranded by one of these things. Or when you're trying to tow your snowmobiles or whatever, they're just not up to par at this point. And a lot of people do live in kind of these extreme environments. Look, when I look at an electric car, I think, okay, if I don't have to commute hardly at all, and maybe I decide it's too dangerous to keep in my garage, but maybe I decide I'm willing to take the risk. It's fine, bop around town, little car. But the mandates, especially when so much of the world is still, in more or less a like a rural or a suburban kind of lifestyle, it's not ready for prime time.
I calculated what it would. My wife and I took a vacation, not last summer, but the summer before, to Estes Park, Colorado. Drove straight through. Made it in. I think I made it in 14 hours. Pretty good time. Maybe in 12, but in any case, I calculated what it would take, how long it would take for me to get there and back in an electric vehicle, looking at vehicles of different ranges. I would have had basically 2 days of vacation. when you figure how often you have to stop to charge because of the range, how long it takes to charge, because most places don't have fast chargers. It would make travel a nightmare just from Dallas or Rowlett, where I live, to Estes Park. It would take me extra hours to days just to go to Austin for most of the vehicles, certainly to Houston for most of the vehicles. And now they're improving. You're right. They're improving all the time. And they may get there, but they're not there yet. And, a lot of people drive trucks, right? Electric trucks have had very notable problems, not just with range, but with towing capacity, basically to match the performance of a comparable gas-powered vehicle. And to be fair, anyone can say, well, yeah, your battery can go out. A lot of cars don't start. Yeah, you know what? My car doesn't start. I go up to the local auto parts store, grab a battery, put it in, and it starts, and it has the full range. You ain't going to do that in an electric vehicle. You don't just go to the local.
AutoZone does not carry Tesla batteries.
That's right. So it's a whole different critter when your electric vehicle stalls in the snow.
Yeah, and I want to talk about something related to snow. Linnea mentioned it about the cold and the snow, limited range, all that sort of stuff. One of the things that's happened in California recently, because of this exceptional winter California's had, is that all of the yuppies in San Francisco who own Teslas want to go up and ski, right? They want to go up to Sugar Bowl. They want to go up to what used to be known as Squaw Valley. They want to ski because there's fantastic powder. And so they take their Teslas and they set off from San Francisco to Lake Tahoe. which is about 100+ mile drive, which should be easily within the range of the Tesla, right? Problem is, once you start going up the hill, it starts getting cold really quick. So you've not only got the extra torque required and energy required to get up the hill, but you've got the cold that is squishing the battery capacity. Bottom line is, there are reports going around throughout Interstate 80 where people are driving Teslas and they're conking out before they get to Lake Tahoe, and they're stranded, and they have to call AAA and get hauled back home or to a charging station or whatever. And their whole ski weekend is ruined because they're driving an electric car. Interestingly enough, at the very summit of Donner's Summit, you know, the on Interstate 80, as you go over, there is a Tesla charging station. Well, not a Tesla, but an electric charging station that worked with different models at each rest stop at Donner's Summit on each way, eastbound and westbound. And guess what? You put in your credit card and you get a charge. But what happens when you put that credit card in? A diesel generator kicks in, right? Immediately, a diesel generator charging your Tesla. So what are we actually saving with this kind of maniacal idea of saving the planet with green electric cars when you've got your diesel generator powering up to run this thing? It's nuts.
The only place I could imagine stopping for like an hour to try to charge a car or something would be at Buc-ee's, but that's because you like can't get out of there before an hour is up because there's so many people. So
right.
Yeah. Well, I was in, I've gone to South Dakota. It's, you go through Oklahoma, you go through parts of Nebraska, and it's like, well, hold it. So you got an EV charging station out here in the middle of nowhere. What am I going to do for an hour and a half? I just got to sit there. To be fair, Anthony, those people that got stuck going up to the people that got stuck. Yeah, the comments today are wonderful. A lot of people with good wit. The people that were driving up to Tahoe to ski, at least if they had their skis, maybe they could ski back down the mountain from where their Tesla got stuck, right? At least until, they got low enough that the snow ran out.
All right. So we got to go on to our final topic here. We headlined ESG, environmental, social, and government scores. Now, this is another idea from the left where everything you do in business or whatever has to have an ESG score to determine how good of a person you are in terms of saving the planet and so forth. And so what's been happening is that there's been a big push for companies to create an ESG scoring system or use an ESG scoring system for their company. Bottom line is that companies are like saying, yes, we'll do ESG. Well, yes, that's perfect. We want to save the planet and be good citizens and all of that sort of rubbish, right? Bottom line is when they look at how much it actually costs them and what it requires them to do, they're basically saying, gosh, I don't really want to do that, but we'll talk about it and give you lip service. So a good portion of the companies out there, according to a new report, are giving lip service to ESG because it's been mandated, but they're not actually doing it. They're not walking the talk. And what a surprise.
Yeah, I think many of these companies were always going to game the system. It's not like they discovered it was expensive. They knew going in it was a PR opportunity for them. Just like all the companies that say my product is green, and then when you test them, or when an environmental group gets involved and really starts going in, it's like, yeah, not so much. So I suspect that a lot of these guys, it was virtue signaling from the very start. It was, we're going to be greener than thou, and
it just hit me.
Change
What we need is virtue signaling blinker fluid. Sorry, Sterling, go ahead.
Well, I was basically done. Like, look, they never intended to change their production line. They never intended to change the chemicals that go into their products. But they wanted to say that they were. And so when there's no one monitoring, and to be fair, no common agreement as to what stands for ESG, right? Tesla was rated lower than Exxon by one rating service on the ESG score because they didn't like Elon Musk taking over Twitter. Well, hold it. What does that have to do with your ESG score? He likes free speech, and so suddenly Tesla is a dirtier product than ExxonMobil. That just shows you it's all subjective, and corporations are great at gaming subjective rating systems.
Yeah, and it's just like anything that's been mandated by the government and the left. It sounds good on paper. It looks good in terms of PR, but when you actually get down to the brass tacks of doing it, you discover it's unworkable. It's impossible to continue running a company, making a product, and meeting all of these targets that they want. It just isn't going to happen. Meanwhile, they're out there screaming about the climate crisis, which, of course, is nothing but a PR thing. And it's just unbelievable that these companies are buying into the stuff. The good news is that they're realizing that after going through the big PR commitment and all that stuff, that, hey, maybe this isn't such a good idea after all, and they're backing down from it.
I read this week, I think, that 4 of the major banks are in trouble financially. And I'm wondering how much of that trouble is caused by them going woke, in the sense of adopting ESG, cutting off loans to companies that are in industries that they don't like, that their president doesn't like, because it's, guns or oil. How much is costing them because states won't let them underwrite bonds and things in their states if they're going to be woke. My suspicion is a lot of these banks are about to have a big woke wake-up call.
A woke awakening.
A woke awakening, yes.
Yeah, Linnea, you worked in the petroleum industry. Did they try to initiate any ESG standards while you were out there on the oil drilling platforms? Did you have to give a green report every day on how much you saved the planet?
Well, nothing quite so severe as that, but every company has a big old sustainability tab on their front page. Something that at our recent climate conference, I think it was Alex Epstein who pointed this out, is that there isn't enough positive advocacy about oil and gas from the oil and gas companies. They spend all their time apologizing or trying to come up with, a way to say, well, actually, we're actually more green than you think, instead of talking about the positives that their product has. And so basically all of these companies are corrupt in that way. Other than individual smaller companies that don't put up with it, there are very few in the majors, especially, who don't do some form of climate virtue signaling. In addition to that, you also have a pretty substantial social and governance side, because ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance. And the social and governance is going to be your policy issues. So this is basically like the banks and fiduciary kind of companies are coming in and saying, like, we're not going to give you a loan if you have social opinions, or if your company promotes social opinions or climate, denial is what they'll say, or whatever it is. And there was, who was it? I'm totally blanking out on who it was a few months ago who went to, I believe, the Texas legislature and said that he was denied a loan from a bank for his oil company, and the bank told him, well, if you tweet these affirming climate change statements, then we will give you your loan, but you have to affirm that climate change is a clear and present catastrophic danger. And he basically told them to stick it, where the sun don't shine, and went on to tell the Texas government that this was happening, and that helped to pass a bunch of anti-ESG legislation in Texas, which was a good step. But it's this isn't stuff that's being necessarily pushed by government, which is part of the worst part about it. It's not necessarily that some state government, and sometimes this does happen, but it's not necessarily that a state government is coming in and saying, hey, you need to do this. You need to be more environmentally friendly as a company or whatever, or we're going to come in and, I don't know, everything with the government is by the point of a gun, right? So basically, you know, we're going to come throw you in jail. No, it's that the banks are pressured to enforce this stuff.
Well, but hold it. Pressured by who? Some rump
Well,
group.
government, but also the
that owns
social
2%
pressure.
of their.
I would
well,
argue that the social pressure from their boards, from their trustees and stuff are part of this too. It's not just that the government's pushing it behind the scenes, which they are, but
yeah, they're
I
in
would
bed with
argue
them
that
behind the
there's a significant private push on this, which is a
Well,
lot more troubling to me because you kind of
okay,
expect it from government.
Yeah, it's the elites, the people who
Yeah.
lead them. It's Larry Fink at BlackRock. It's not BlackRock staffers that are demanding this. It's certainly not the guys that were making money on trading for BlackRock. It's his desire, and he's shoving it down, and it's costing them. It's costing them. And the question is, how long will they go along with this? Continue down that path when it's costing them? It's madness. And but you say it's not the government. So some state governments have gotten on board with this, right? In New York, maybe Massachusetts, California, maybe Maryland. They want to divest from oil and stuff like that, and so they're putting pressure that way. Most state governments aren't, but the federal government is working hand in hand with these guys in the back room, right? They say we want to do this, but it would help if we had the SEC and the Office of the Currency and the Fed pass laws that say you got to have reporting on this, and so you know it's not they're just as tied into government as other rent-seeking industries are.
Right.
Right.
Well,
So,
and
go ahead,
sorry.
Linnea.
And I was
Go
going to
ahead.
say part of the worst part of the ESG situation is that it's not, you know, they've got companies that do nothing but give other companies ESG rankings, right? So you don't even have to opt in to a program like this to be scored.
Yep. All right. Well, time to wrap it up for issue number 54 of Climate Change Roundtable. We've talked about everything related to batteries and fires and ESG. Oh my, it's a mess. It's a mess. And it looks like it's going to be part of our future, whether we like it or not, because, you know, the left seems to be always right because you have the virtual signal and all of that fun stuff. Anyway, thank you, Linnea. Thank you, Sterling, for being on today. And a reminder to visit climaterealism.com and check out what we do every day, and that is skewer the media and their claims about climate, and also climateataglance.com, which gives you factually empowered pieces of information to fight back against climate alarmism. So I'm Anthony Watts, Senior Fellow for Environment and Climate with the Heartland Institute. For Linnea and for Sterling, we wish you a good day and a great weekend.